In the dying railroad town of Gravel Creek, a young seamstress was about to inherit something far more dangerous than rust and iron. What started as a routine visit to a lawyer's cramped office took a chilling turn when she received the deed to a railroad car her estranged uncle had sealed shut for 15 years. Nora Caldwell wasn't your typical Milltown seamstress. For 6 years, since her father's suspicious death, she had survived on needle and thread, known for her quiet resilience and the questions she never stopped asking. But the accident that killed James Ward, when she discovered heavy locks and burned symbols, covering the abandoned car's wooden panels. She had no idea she was standing at the threshold of a conspiracy that had claimed 37 lives. The truth her father died protecting: cargo records, murder ledgers, and proof of a railroad. Tycoon's empire built on blood waited inside that coffin-shaped box bearing her father's carved initials. What began as a peculiar inheritance would become a reckoning 15 years in the making. Gravel Creek would never be the same after Nora Caldwell opened the locks her uncle left behind, transforming a rusted relic into a memorial for the ghost crew, the silenced workers whose voices finally found their witness in a seamstress who refused to let murder rust away with time. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I never expected to inherit anything from Uncle Thaddeus. We hadn't spoken in 12 years. Not since my father's funeral, when he stood at the back of the church with his hat in his hands and said nothing to anyone. So when the lawyer's letter arrived at Mrs. O'Rourke's boarding house, I assumed it was a mistake. It wasn't, Miss Caldwell, the lawyer said, adjusting his spectacles in his cramped office above the general store. Your uncle's will is quite specific. He leaves you his entire estate, such as it is. Which is what exactly? I asked, my seamstress fingers still pricked with needle marks from the morning's work. He coughed. A railroad car, currently located at the old switching yard on the eastern edge of town. I stared at him. A railroad car? Yes, miss, one car. Rusted, I'm told. Been sitting there for near about 15 years. He slid the deed across his desk. It's yours, free and clear, though I can't say what you'll do with it. The paper felt heavier than it should have when I picked it up. My uncle's signature was there at the bottom, shaky but deliberate, and beside it in his spidery handwriting a single line: for Nora, the truth waits in the rust. What does this mean? I pointed to the note. The lawyer shrugged. Your uncle was peculiar in his final months. Kept talking about debts and secrets. I assumed it was the fever. I folded the deed carefully and tucked it into my pocket. Outside, the afternoon sun was already slanting low over the town's sagging buildings. Gravel Creek had been dying slowly ever since the railroad moved its main line 20 miles south. What was left were memories and rust, broken promises and broken tracks. I should have walked away. Should have sold the deed to a scrap merchant and taken whatever coins I could get. But something in my uncle's words pulled at me like a fishhook in my chest. The truth waits in the rust. The switching yard lay at the edge of town where progress had died mid-breath. Rails that once gleamed now disappeared into weeds taller than a man. The old yard office leaned like a drunk against its own shadow. Windows broken, roof caving in, and there, sitting on a forgotten spur track, was my inheritance. The railroad car looked like something that had crawled out of the earth to die. Rust covered every surface in shades of orange and brown, like dried blood. The wooden sides were weathered grey, warped by years of rain and sun. Both doors were sealed shut, and heavy locks hung from iron hasps that looked newer than the car itself. I approached slowly, my boots crunching on the gravel. The evening was too quiet. No birds sang in the nearby trees. No insects buzzed. It was as if the car existed in its own pocket of silence. Strange markings covered the lower panels. At first, I thought they were just scratches from years of neglect, but as I moved closer, I could see they were deliberate. Symbols burned into the wood, circles within circles, arrows pointing downward, and something that looked like a warning, though in no language I recognized. Heard you inherited old Thaddeus's junk. I spun around to find Henry Moss, the blacksmith's son, leaning against a fence post. He wore a smirk that made my jaw tighten. "It's mine now," I said. "What of it?" "Just funny is all. That car's been sitting here since before my daddy set up his forge. Story goes, it was part of a train that never arrived. Just this one car left behind like a bad memory. What happened to the rest of the train?" Henry shrugged. "Nobody knows. Or if they do, they ain't saying. But folks around here, they don't go near that car. Say it's cursed. That's superstition. Maybe." He pushed off the fence post and started walking away. "But your daddy worked the rails before he died, didn't he? Awful strange that his brother would leave you the one piece of railroad nobody else wants." I watched him disappear down the road, his words echoing in my head. My father had worked for the railroad. He died in what they called an accident at the switching yard, crushed between two cars during a routine coupling. I was 16. The railroad paid my mother $30 and told her not to ask questions. She died 2 years later, her grief having hollowed her out from the inside. I turned back to the railroad car. In the fading light, those burned symbols seemed darker, deeper. I reached out and touched one. The wood was warm, though the sun had already dropped below the horizon. Something rattled inside the car. I jerked my hand back, heart hammering. I stood perfectly still listening, but the silence had returned, thick and heavy as wool. "Nora Caldwell, what in God's name are you doing out here?" Maggie O'Rourke strode across the yard, her red hair coming loose from its pins, her face flushed from the walk. She was the only friend I had in this dying town, the only person who never looked at me with pity when she remembered I was an orphan. "I inherited it," I said, pointing to the car. "From my uncle." Maggie stopped beside me and stared. "He left you that?" "Every glorious inch of rust. What are you supposed to do with it?" I pulled out the deed and showed her the note. Maggie read it twice, her lips moving silently. Then she looked up at me with those sharp green eyes that missed nothing. "The truth waits in the rust," she read aloud. "Nora, that sounds like a warning, or an invitation." "To what? Get yourself killed like your father?" The words hung between us. We'd never spoken directly about how my father died, about the whispers that it wasn't really an accident, about the way the railroad men had closed ranks and refused to answer questions. "I need to know what's inside," I said quietly. Maggie studied the car, then the heavy locks. "Those locks are new. 15 years that car's been sitting here, and somebody put new locks on it." She was right. The iron was dark but not rusted, the mechanism still gleaming with oil. "Somebody doesn't want it opened," I said, "or wants to make sure that if it is opened, they'll know about it." Maggie walked around the car slowly, examining every surface. "These markings, Nora, they're not random. Look, see how they repeat?" I followed her around the car. She was right. The symbols formed a pattern, circling the car like a chain. At the rear, where the coupling mechanism should have been, someone had burned a larger symbol into the wood, a circle with a cross through it, and beneath it 3 numbers, 23. 15-7, Maggie read. "Mean anything to you?" "No, but even as I said it, something stirred in my memory. My father, sitting at our kitchen table late at night, writing in a journal he kept hidden. I'd been young, maybe 10 years old, and I'd crept downstairs for water. He'd looked up at me with haunted eyes and closed the journal quickly. But not before I'd seen numbers written across the page. Numbers he'd circled again and again, Maggie," I said slowly. "I need to get into this car tonight. Nora, those locks, I don't care about the locks. My uncle left me this for a reason. And those numbers? I've seen them before. In my father's journal." Maggie grabbed my arm. "Listen to me. If there's something in that car worth locking up, there's likely people willing to hurt you to keep it locked. Then I need to know, before they know I know." It was circular logic, but Maggie understood. She always understood. She sighed and looked up at the darkening sky. "Fine, but we do this smart. We come back after midnight, when the town's asleep. And we bring tools." The boarding house clock struck 1 in the morning when Maggie and I slipped out through the kitchen door. She carried a leather satchel filled with tools borrowed from her late husband's workshop, a pry bar, a small axe, and a rusted hacksaw that looked older than the railroad car itself. I carried a lantern, unlit, and a hammer that felt inadequate in my hand. The moon was a sliver, barely enough to light our path. We moved through the sleeping town like ghosts, keeping to the shadows, avoiding the main street where the sheriff sometimes made his rounds. Neither of us spoke. The weight of what we were about to do pressed down on both of us like a physical thing. The switching yard loomed ahead, darker than the surrounding darkness. I could make out the shape of the railroad car against the lesser black of the night sky, a hulking presence that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. "I don't like this," Maggie whispered as we approached. "It feels wrong," she was right. The air around the car felt thicker, harder to breathe. And that silence was back, that unnatural quiet that made every sound we made seem like a scream. I lit the lantern with shaking hands. The flame caught, casting jumping shadows across the rust and wood. The symbols seemed to move in the flickering light, writhing like living things. "Let's start with the locks," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Maggie pulled out the hacksaw and set to work on the first lock. The sound of metal on metal split the silence like thunder. Every scrape made me flinch, certain that someone would hear, would come running, would stop us. But no one came. 5 minutes of sawing, and the first lock gave way with a sharp crack. Maggie wiped sweat from her forehead despite the cool night air. 1 down. 2 to go. The second lock took longer. The blade was dulling, and Maggie had to stop twice to rest her arms. I held the lantern high, watching the shadows beyond its circle of light, listening for footsteps, for voices, for any sign we'd been discovered. Nothing. When the second lock finally broke, I reached for the door's handle. It was cold under my palm, colder than the night air. I pulled, and the door groaned, a sound like something dying. "Wait," Maggie said. She pointed to the third lock, the largest one, positioned at the center of the door. "This one's different." She was right. Unlike the other locks, this one wasn't just a padlock hanging from a hasp. It was built into the door itself, a complex mechanism with a keyhole that looked almost decorative. "We can't cut through that," Maggie said. "The housing's too thick." I knelt and examined it more closely. Round the keyhole, more symbols were carved into the metal, and scratched faintly beneath them, almost invisible unless you knew where to look. 23, 15, 7, my father's numbers. "It's a combination lock," I breathed. "Maggie, hold the light closer." I pressed on the first number, 23. Nothing happened. I tried twisting it. Still nothing. I pushed harder, and with a soft click the number sank inward slightly. "Keep going," Maggie urged. 15, 7. Each number clicked into place with that same soft sound. And then the entire mechanism turned with a deep, grinding noise that seemed to come from inside the car itself. The door swung open. The smell hit us first. Old wood, rust, and something else underneath, something that made my stomach turn. Death, maybe. Or just the smell of secrets sealed up too long. I raised the lantern and looked inside. The interior of the car had been converted into something that wasn't quite a freight car and wasn't quite a passenger car. Wooden crates were stacked along both sides, secured with ancient ropes. But what dominated the center of the space was a large coffin-shaped box, positioned lengthwise down the middle of the car. "Jesus, Mary, and Joseph," Maggie whispered. I stepped inside. The floorboards creaked under my weight, but they held. I moved to the nearest crate and tried to read the markings burned into its side. The letters were faded, but I could make out fragments. "Private. Do not open. Mercer Line. Mercer Line. Silas Mercer's Railroad. Nora." "Look at this." Maggie stood beside the coffin-shaped box, her hand pressed against her mouth. I moved closer and saw what she'd seen. Carved into the side of the box, barely visible in the lamplight, were initials. Dozens of them, scratched into the wood like names on a prison wall. And there, near the bottom, fresh enough that the wood around them was still lighter than the rest, G.C. James Caldwell. My father. My hand trembled so badly, I nearly dropped the lantern. Maggie caught it and held it steady, while I traced the letters with my finger. They were deep, deliberate. My father had carved these. He'd been in this car. He'd touched this box. What's inside it? I asked, my voice cracking. I don't want to know, Maggie said. Nora, we should go. We should tell someone about this. Tell who? The sheriff who ruled my father's death an accident. The railroad that paid $30 and told my mother to shut up. I grabbed the edge of the coffin box and pulled. It was heavy, heavier than it should have been if it was empty, but it moved slightly, and I could see that it wasn't nailed shut. It had hinges along one side and a simple latch on the other. Help me, I said. Nora, help me! Maggie set down the lantern and took the other side. Together we lifted the lid. It opened with a whisper of air, like the box itself was exhaling. Inside was not a body. Documents, hundreds of them tied in bundles with string, leather-bound ledgers, envelopes sealed with wax, and beneath them all, wrapped in oiled cloth, something that glinted in the lamplight. I picked up one of the ledgers and opened it. The pages were filled with columns of numbers, names, dates, shipping manifests, cargo records, and beside each entry in a different hand were notes. Crew silenced. No witnesses. Paid Sheriff Callahan $200 for disposal. Ward dealt with. Made to look like mill accident. My vision blurred. I read the last line again. Ward. My father's name had been Ward before he married my mother. James Ward, who'd been an engineer before he became a mill worker, who died in an accident that no one questioned. Nora, Maggie said softly. What is this? Evidence, I said. This is evidence of murder. I flipped through more pages. Names I recognized. Men from town who died in accidents over the years. All of them had worked for the railroad. All of them had discovered something they weren't supposed to know. And all of them had been killed by Silas Mercer. A sound outside froze us both. Footsteps on gravel. More than one person. Somebody's coming, Maggie hissed. I grabbed one of the ledgers and shoved it inside my coat. Maggie closed the coffin box as quietly as she could. We backed toward the door, and I reached for the lantern. The footsteps stopped just outside the car. I'm telling you, I heard something, a man's voice said. Somebody's been at the locks. Can't be. Mercer's had men watching this car for years. Well, they ain't watching now, are they? I blew out the lantern. Darkness swallowed us. Maggie gripped my arm so hard, I felt her nails through my sleeve. The door we'd come through was still open. If we moved now, they'd see us. But if we stayed, they'd find us the moment they stepped inside. I felt along the wall of the car, praying for another way out. My hand found a seam, then a handle. A second door at the other end. I pulled. It opened silently and cold night air rushed in. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Maggie and I slipped out into the darkness, just as lamplight bloomed behind us. We ran, not caring about the noise now, our boots pounding on gravel and then dirt as we left the switching yard behind. We didn't stop running until we reached the boarding house. Gasping and shaking, our hearts hammering. Inside my room, I pulled out the ledger and laid it on my bed. Maggie locked the door and leaned against it, breathing hard. What have we gotten ourselves into? She asked. I opened the ledger to a random page and read aloud. August 14th, 1869, shipment 47 contraband weapons. Crew of 6. All disposed of. Payment rendered to Callahan. I flipped to another page. March 3rd, 1871, engineer James Ward discovered discrepancy in manifests. Removed from railroad position. Subsequent mill accident arranged. My hands shook so badly I could barely hold the book. Nora, Maggie whispered. They killed your father because he found out about the weapons. I looked up at her. My uncle must have known. That's why he left me the car. That's why he wrote that note. He was trying to tell me the truth. Then why didn't he just tell you directly? Because Mercer would have killed him too. Maybe he did anyway, just to be safe. I closed the ledger carefully. My father hadn't died in an accident. He'd been murdered. And somewhere in this town, the man who ordered it was still alive, still powerful, still covering his tracks. We need help, Maggie said. Someone who knows about the railroad. Someone who can verify what's in that ledger. I knew exactly who she meant. There was only one person in this town who'd worked the rails long enough to remember the old shipments, the vanished trains, the accidents that weren't accidents. Elias Ward. my father's brother. The engineer they'd blamed for the very disaster that had destroyed so many lives. The man who disappeared 15 years ago, the same night that railroad car was abandoned in the switching yard. Finding Elias Ward wasn't hard. Staying sober was apparently harder. 3 days after our midnight visit to the railroad car, I tracked him to a tavern 10 miles outside Gravel Creek. It was the kind of place that didn't ask questions, where wanted men and broken souls drank away their histories in equal measure. The bartender pointed to a corner table without me having to ask. The Ward fellow. Been here 3 days straight. Running a tab he can't pay. Elias looked like a ghost of the uncle I barely remembered. 15 years of running had carved deep lines into his face. His hair was more grey than brown. His hands shook when he lifted his glass, and his eyes held the kind of emptiness that came from seeing too much and saying too little. I sat down across from him without invitation. He looked up slowly, squinting as if trying to place me. Then recognition flickered across his face, followed immediately by something that looked like pain. "Nora," he said. His voice was rough, scraped raw by whiskey and silence. "You've got your mother's eyes. I've got my father's stubbornness." He almost smiled at that. Almost. "What do you want?" "I want to talk about a railroad car." His hand froze halfway to his glass. The color drained from his already pale face. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do. The car on the eastern spur. The one Uncle Thaddeus left me. The one that's been sitting there for 15 years, ever since the night you disappeared. Leave it alone, girl." "I can't. I've already opened it." Elias closed his eyes. "God help you." "He didn't, so I'm asking you instead." I leaned forward. "What's in that car, Uncle Elias? What was my father trying to tell the world before Mercer had him killed?" "Keep your voice down." He glanced around the tavern, but the few other patrons were too deep in their own bottles to care about ours. Still, he lowered his voice to barely a whisper. "If Mercer knows you've been near that car, you're already dead. You just don't know it yet. Then I've got nothing to lose by learning the truth." He stared at me for a long moment, and I saw the battle playing out behind his eyes. Whatever he knew, it had been eating him alive for 15 years. Part of him wanted to tell me. The other part wanted to drink until he forgot why he'd ever cared. "That cargo," he said finally, "should never have rolled. Not through my town. Not on my rails." "What was it?" "Weapons. Rifles mostly. Some pistols. All contraband, all illegal. Mercer was running them for someone back east. Someone with enough money and power to make problems disappear." He took a long drink. "Your father and we were on the crew that was supposed to move the shipment through. But James, he couldn't leave it alone. He started counting, started keeping records, and he figured out that Mercer was skimming, taking weapons off the top and selling them elsewhere, double-crossing whoever hired him. So Mercer killed him, not right away. First, he had James removed from the railroad, trumped up some charges, got him fired. Thought that would be enough. But James went to the mill and kept asking questions, kept poking at the wound. So Mercer arranged an accident. Elias's hands were shaking harder now. They made me watch, made me stand there while they crushed him between those cars. Made sure I understood that if I ever talked, I'd end up the same way. Or worse, they'd hurt you. Hurt your mother. Rage, bright and hot, blazed through me. "You ran." "I ran," he agreed, and there was no pride in his voice. "I took the blame for the accident. Let them call me incompetent. Let them say I was responsible for the whole mess. And I disappeared. Thought if I was gone, Mercer would forget about me. But he didn't forget about the railroad car. No, that car holds all the evidence of what he did. Not just to James, but to the other crews, the other men who asked too many questions. Mercer kept it all like some kind of trophy or insurance. And he's had men watching it ever since. I pulled out the ledger I'd taken from the car and slid it across the table. "Is this what you mean?" Elias's eyes widened. "You took this from the car?" "I had to. I had to know." He opened it with trembling fingers and read. With each page he turned, he seemed to age another year. When he finally looked up at me, tears were streaming down his face. "These names," he whispered. "These men, I knew them, worked alongside them. And Mercer just Just cross them out like they were nothing. We can use this, I said. We can take it to the authorities, prove what Mercer did. What authorities? Elias laughed bitterly. Sheriff Callahan? He's on Mercer's payroll. The federal marshals? Mercer owns the judges who appoint them. The newspapers? Mercer bought those out years ago. He closed the ledger. There's no justice for men like us, Nora. Only survival. I don't accept that. You should. You're young. You can still leave. Take this ledger, sell it, get enough money to start somewhere else. Forget about Gravel Creek and everything in it. And let my father's death mean nothing? Your father's death meant he died protecting you. Don't throw that away by getting yourself killed too. I stood up, anger making my movements sharp. I'm not running, and I'm not letting Mercer win. That railroad car is mine now. Those documents are mine. And if you won't help me use them, I'll find someone who will. I turned to leave, but Elias's voice stopped me. Wait, I looked back. He was standing now, swaying slightly, but with something new in his eyes. Something that looked almost like hope. If you're really going to do this, he said slowly, if you're really going to take on Mercer, you need to understand what you're fighting. That car, those documents, they're just the beginning. There's more in there, things even I don't fully understand. Then come with me. Help me understand. If I do, we're both dead. We're dead anyway if I do this alone. At least together we have a chance. Elias picked up the ledger and held it like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Your father would hate me for letting you do this. My father would hate you more for leaving me to do it alone. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. When he opened them again, something had shifted. The broken drunk was still there, but underneath I could see the ghost of the engineer he'd once been. The man who'd worked beside my father. The man who'd run, not because he was a coward, but because he'd been trying to protect what was left of his family. All right, he said quietly. I'll help you, but we do this carefully. Mercer has eyes everywhere. If he even suspects you're digging into this, he'll move against you. He already suspects. His men came to the car the night I opened it. They know someone's been inside, Elias swore under his breath. Then we don't have much time. Mercer will be closing ranks, preparing his defenses. We need to move fast. What do? We go back to that car. And this time we open everything. Every crate, every box, every sealed envelope. We find out exactly what your father died for. He grabbed his coat from the back of his chair. And then we figure out how to make sure his death wasn't in vain. As we left the tavern, I felt the weight of what we were about to do settle over me like a shroud. My father had tried to expose Mercer and died for it. My uncle had run for 15 years to escape the same fate. Now I was walking willingly into the teeth of the monster that had destroyed my family. But I wasn't walking alone anymore. And somewhere in that rusted railroad car, in the documents and secrets it held, was the weapon we needed to finally bring Silas Mercer to justice, or die trying. We returned to the railroad car at dusk, when the light was failing and shadows grew long enough to hide in. Elias carried a crowbar, and I had brought Maggie despite his protests. 3 sets of eyes were better than 2, and Maggie refused to let me face this without her. The car sat exactly as we'd left it. Doors hanging open like a mouth waiting to swallow us whole. They haven't touched it, Elias muttered. That's wrong. If Mercer's men found it open, they should have sealed it again. Maybe they're waiting to see who comes back, Maggie said. The thought sent ice through my veins, but we'd come too far to turn back now. We climbed inside, and Elias lit a lantern he'd brought. The light pushed back the darkness, but couldn't quite banish it. Shadows clung to the corners like living things. These crates, Elias said, moving to the nearest stack. Help me open one. We pried off the top of the first crate with the crowbar. Inside, wrapped in oiled cloth, were rifles. Dozens of them, their metal still gleaming despite years of storage. Elias lifted one and turned it over in his hands. These are army issue, he said quietly. Stolen, most likely. Mercer was selling them to whoever paid the highest price. Insurrectionists, criminals, foreign agents. Didn't matter to him as long as the money was good. We opened another crate. More weapons. Pistols this time and boxes of ammunition. A third crate held something worse. documents bearing official seals, property deeds with forged signatures, and contracts that granted Mercer rights to land he'd never legally purchased. He wasn't just running guns, I breathed. He was stealing entire territories. Whole towns. This is bigger than I thought, Elias said, his voice shaking. Nora, this goes all the way to territorial governors, maybe even Washington. If we expose this, when we expose this, I corrected. Elias looked at the coffin-shaped box in the center of the car. Even in the lamplight, it seemed to absorb darkness rather than reflect it. That box, he said. I helped load it 15 years ago. Your father and I, we knew something terrible was inside, but we never opened it. Never dared. What stopped you? Fear. He said it simply, without shame. Pure fear. Mercer told us that box held the names of everyone he'd ever killed, everyone he'd ever bought, everyone who owed him favors. He said it was his insurance, that if anything happened to him, those names would be released, and powerful men would make sure we all died screaming. I walked to the box and put my hand on its lid. My father carved his initials here. He wanted someone to know he'd seen it, that he'd been inside. James was braver than me, Elias said quietly. Always was. A sound outside froze us all. Boots on gravel. Multiple pairs, moving purposefully toward the car. Out, Elias hissed. Now. But before we could move, a voice called from the darkness. Stay where you are. All three of you. 2 men appeared at the door, both armed. I recognized one of them. Thomas Grell, Mercer's foreman, a bull of a man with dead eyes and scarred knuckles. Mr. Mercer wants a word, Grell said. About property that doesn't belong to you. We didn't have a choice. They marched us through town at gunpoint, past windows where curtains twitched and faces quickly disappeared. Everyone in Gravel Creek knew better than to interfere with Mercer's business. The railroad office stood at the center of town, a 3-story building that loomed over everything else like a monument to ambition. Grell pushed us through the front door and up a carpeted staircase to the top floor, where Silas Mercer held court. I'd seen him before, of course. Everyone had. He cut a striking figure, tall, silver-haired, dressed in expensive suits that looked out of place in our dusty town. He smiled when he saw us, and that smile was worse than any threat. Miss Caldwell, he said, gesturing to a chair. Please sit. And Mr. Ward, how unexpected to see you after all these years. Mercer, Elias said, his voice flat. Still bitter, I see. Despite the generous terms of your departure. Mercer poured himself a whiskey from a crystal decanter. I could have had you hanged for negligence. Instead, I let you run. Some might call that mercy. Some might call it covering your tracks. Mercer's smile didn't waver. Miss Caldwell, I understand you've taken an interest in your inheritance. An old railroad car, essentially worthless scrap. Yet you've been inside it, disturbing its contents. It's mine, I said. My uncle left it to me. Your uncle was a thief and a traitor. That car and everything in it belongs to Mercer Line Railroad. The deed he gave you was fraudulent. Then why did you let it sit there for 15 years? The question seemed to catch him off guard. His smile slipped for just a moment. Some things are best left alone, forgotten, like my father. The room went very quiet. Mercer set down his glass with careful precision. Your father was a tragic casualty of industrial progress. These things happened. You had him killed. I did no such thing. If you're going to make accusations, Miss Caldwell, you should have evidence. He walked to the window and looked out over the town. I built this place. When I arrived, Gravel Creek was nothing but mud and false hope. I brought the railroad. I brought prosperity. And yes, sometimes difficult decisions had to be made. But that's the burden of leadership. You're a murderer, Maggie said suddenly. And a thief. Mercer turned to her with that terrible smile. Mrs. O'Rourke, the boarding house owner. Your establishment has been struggling lately, hasn't it? Strange how fires can start in old buildings. So many accidents waiting to happen. The threat hung in the air like poison. Maggie's face went pale, but she didn't back down. You can't threaten everyone, I said. Eventually, someone will stand up to you. Someone already did, Mercer replied, looking at Elias. I'm sure Mr. Ward remembers what happened to him. What happened to his brother? You took everything from me, Elias said quietly. I gave you your life. You're still breathing, aren't you? Unlike James, who simply couldn't leave well enough alone. The casual way he said my father's name made rage flood through me. I stood up, and Grell's hand went to his gun, but I didn't care. That railroad car contains evidence of your crimes. Documents, ledgers, proof of murder and fraud. And I'm going to make sure everyone sees it. Mercer studied me for a long moment. Then he laughed. You're just like your father. Brave, foolish, and utterly doomed. He nodded to Grell. Let them go. But make sure they understand that the next time they trespass on my property, there will be consequences. We were escorted out roughly, pushed into the street like garbage. But as we walked away, I heard Mercer call after us, Miss Caldwell, do give my regards to your uncle. Oh, wait, I forgot. He's dead. Heart failure, they said. Such a shame. We made it back to the boarding house, shaking and furious. Maggie locked every door and window while Elias paced like a caged animal. He killed Thaddeus, I said. That's what he was telling us. My uncle didn't die of natural causes. We need to leave, Elias said. Tonight. Before he decides to finish what he started. I'm not running. Then you're a fool. I went to my room and began searching. If my uncle had known he was in danger, if he'd known Mercer was coming for him, he would have left me something more than just a deed. Some way to fight back. I tore through my belongings, checking every pocket, every hidden seam. Nothing. I was about to give up when I noticed something odd about the deed itself. The paper felt thicker than it should, as if two sheets had been pressed together. I held it up to the lamplight and saw the shadow of writing between the layers. Maggie, I called. I need steam, now. She brought a kettle, and I held the deed over the spout. The heat and moisture loosened the glue, and the papers began to separate. Between them was a single sheet, covered in my uncle's handwriting. Nora, if you're reading this, I'm dead and you're in danger. The coffin box contains more than documents. There's a journal, James's journal. He documented everything, every meeting, every payoff, every murder. It's the only complete record of Mercer's crimes. But be warned, Mercer killed my brother, your father, to keep that journal hidden. He'll kill you too. Trust Elias. He ran, but he never forgot. And remember, the truth isn't just about revenge. It's about the others. The ghost crew, the men who died silent. Give them voices. Make their deaths mean something. My hands shook as I finished reading. Elias appeared in the doorway. What is it? I showed him the letter. He read it twice, his face growing harder with each line. I should have stayed, he said hoarsely. I should have fought beside James instead of running. Maybe if I had, you'd be dead too, Maggie interrupted. And Nora would have no one to help her now. Elias looked at me with haunted eyes. That accident. The one that killed your father. It killed my brother too. We were twins, James and I. I felt it when he died. Felt something tear inside me. And I've carried that wound ever since. Then help me heal it, I said. Help me finish what our fathers started. He nodded slowly. The journal. We get the journal and we take it somewhere Mercer can't reach. Federal marshals in the capital. Newspaper editors back east. Someone has to listen. First, we have to survive long enough to get it, Maggie said. We went back before dawn, when the world was still dark and Mercer's men might be sleeping. The three of us moved through the switching yard like ghosts, silent and determined. The railroad car waited. This time, we didn't hesitate. We climbed inside and went straight to the coffin box. Help me, I said to Elias. Together, we lifted the lid completely, removing it entirely and setting it aside. The documents we'd seen before were there, but Elias reached deeper, pulling out bundles of papers until he found what he was looking for. A leather journal, worn and stained, with my father's name embossed on the cover. I opened it with trembling hands. Page after page of meticulous notes. Dates, times, names. Shipments documented. Bribes recorded. And on the last page, written in my father's handwriting, if I die, this is proof. Use it, make them pay. It's all here, I breathed. Everything we need. Then let's go, Elias said urgently. Before what, Mr. Ward? Sheriff Callahan stood at the door, 3 deputies behind him. His gun was drawn, pointed at Elias. By the authority of Mercer Line Railroad, I'm arresting you for trespassing and theft. All 3 of you. This car is mine, I protested. My uncle left it to me. That deed was fraudulent, and you know it. Now hand over whatever you took from this car." I clutched the journal to my chest. "This is evidence of murder, my father's murder, and you helped cover it up." Callahan's face hardened. "I don't know what you're talking about. No, give me that journal, or I'll take it by force." No, the word hung in the air. Callahan raised his gun, pointing it directly at my head. "Last chance, Miss Caldwell." Elias stepped in front of me. "You want it? You'll have to shoot through me first." For a long moment, no one moved. Then Maggie's voice rang out from behind the deputies. "Lower your weapons, all of you." She stood there, holding a lit torch, standing next to one of the opened crates of ammunition. "This place is full of gunpowder and weapons," she said calmly. "If I drop this torch, we all die. So I suggest we talk about this like civilized people." The standoff held for 3 heartbeats. Then Callahan slowly lowered his gun. "You're making a mistake," he said. "The only mistake," I replied. "It was thinking you could bury the truth forever." The standoff lasted only minutes, but it felt like hours. Maggie held that torch steady, her hand never wavering, while Sheriff Callahan calculated his odds. Finally, he made his decision. "Put down the torch, Mrs. O'Rourke. Nobody needs to die today." "Then let us leave," Maggie said. "With the journal." Callahan's jaw tightened. "You know I can't do that." "Then I guess we're all dying today." Something shifted in the sheriff's eyes. Not courage, but fear. Fear of Mercer, fear of the truth coming out, fear of what would happen to him if he failed. That fear made him dangerous. "Take them," he said to his deputies. The deputies moved forward, and Maggie's arm tensed. But Elias spoke quickly, his voice cutting through the tension. "Wait, Sheriff, you were there the day James Ward died. You wrote the report that called it an accident. Did you believe that? Or did Mercer pay you to write it?" Callahan's face went pale. "I don't know what you're talking about." $200, I said, remembering the ledger entry. "That's what he paid you. $200 to dispose of my father's body and make sure no one asked questions." "Shut your mouth." "How many others, Sheriff? How many accidents did you cover up? How many widows and orphans did you lie to?" I said, "Shut up." His hand shook on his gun. "You don't understand. Mercer owns this town. He owns the judge, the land office, half the businesses. If I'd refused him, I'd be dead. My family would be dead. So you chose to live as his dog instead," Elias said quietly. The words hit Callahan like a physical blow. For a moment, I thought I saw something human in his eyes. Shame, maybe, or regret. But then it hardened into anger. "Arrest them," he ordered. "Now." The deputies grabbed us. One of them wrenched the journal from my hands, while another pulled Maggie away from the ammunition crates. She fought, but there were too many of them. They dragged us out of the railroad car and through town as the sun rose over the horizon, painting everything in shades of blood and gold. The jail was a small building behind the sheriff's office with 3 cells that smelled of rust and despair. They locked us in separate cells. Through the bars, I could see Callahan standing in his office, the journal open on his desk, reading with an expression I couldn't decipher. "He's going to burn it," Elias said from his cell. "He'll burn the evidence and claim we're lying." "Let him try," I said. "I memorized half those entries. I can testify even without the journal. Your testimony won't matter if you're dead." The truth of that settled over us like a shroud. Callahan could do anything he wanted. We were in his jail, with no one to help us, no one who would dare stand against Mercer's authority. But I'd underestimated Maggie O'Rourke. 2 hours later, as noonlight filtered through the barred windows, I heard raised voices in the sheriff's office. Maggie's voice, sharp and insistent, cutting through Callahan's protests. "You can't hold us without charges. Show me the warrant. Show me the evidence we've committed a crime. You are trespassing on railroad property that belongs to Nora Caldwell by legal deed, which makes you the criminal for false imprisonment." I pressed my face against the bars, trying to see. Maggie stood in front of Callahan's desk, her hands on her hips, her red hair blazing in the sunlight. And behind her I saw something that made my heart skip. Other people, townspeople, men and women I recognized from the market, from the church, from the mill. They stood in the doorway, silent but present, their faces hard with determination. "What's this?" Callahan demanded. "Witnesses," Maggie said. "People who want to know why you're arresting innocent citizens while Silas Mercer's crimes go unpunished. Get them out of here." "We're not leaving," said a man I recognized as Thomas Brennan, whose son had died in a railroad accident 5 years ago. "Not until you explain what's happening." Callahan stood, his face flushed. "This is none of your business." "It's all our business," said Mary Hendricks, whose husband had been killed in the switching yard. "How many of us have lost someone to Mercer's accidents? How many times have we been told to accept it and move on?" The crowd murmured agreement. Callahan looked around wildly, realizing he was outnumbered. "If you don't leave, I'll arrest you all for disturbing the peace." "Then arrest us," Mary said. "Put the whole town in jail. See how that looks when the territorial governor hears about it." For a long moment, Callahan just stared at them. Then slowly, something in him seemed to break. His shoulders sagged and he sat down heavily in his chair. "You don't understand," he said quietly. "Mercer will kill me. Kill my family. Then help us stop him," I called from my cell. "You have the journal. You've read it. You know what he's done. Be the lawman you're supposed to be just this once." Callahan looked at me through the bars. His face was a map of misery and fear. "I can't." "You mean you won't?" He closed his eyes, and in that moment I knew we'd lost him. Whatever courage he might have had was buried too deep under years of cowardice and compromise. But then Maggie did something unexpected. She walked to his desk, picked up the journal, and held it high so everyone could see. "This book," she announced, "contains proof that Silas Mercer has been running illegal weapons, forging property deeds, bribing officials, and murdering anyone who threatened to expose him. It lists names and dates and payments, everything we need to bring him to justice." "Give that back," Callahan said weakly. "No, this belongs to the people of Gravel Creek, to every widow, every orphan, every worker who's been cheated and silenced." She turned to the crowd. "We're taking this to the federal marshal in the capital tonight. Anyone who wants to come with us is welcome." The crowd erupted in voices, some scared, some angry, some determined. Callahan stood and reached for the journal, but Thomas Brennan blocked his path. "Let them go, Sheriff. Or you'll have to go through all of us." Callahan looked at the faces surrounding him. Faces of people he'd known for years, people he'd failed again and again. His hand dropped from his gun belt. "Get out," he said hoarsely. "All of you." Before I changed my mind, Maggie produced a set of keys, somehow stolen from the deputy's desk, and unlocked our cells. As we filed out, I paused in front of Callahan. "You could have been a good man," I said. "My father thought you were once." He didn't look at me. "Your father was wrong about a lot of things." We left him there, sitting alone in his office with his shame, and walked out into the afternoon sunlight. The crowd surrounded us, not threatening but protective, a wall of bodies between us and whatever Mercer might send. "We need to move fast," Elias said. "Once Mercer hears about this, he'll come with everything he has." "Then let him come," I said. "We're not hiding anymore." We didn't have to wait long. By evening, word had spread through Gravel Creek like wildfire. The railroad car, the journal, the proof of Mercer's crimes. People whispered in the streets, gathered in clusters, and for the first time in years, they weren't afraid to speak Mercer's name with anger instead of fear. Elias wanted us to leave immediately for the capital, but I refused. Something told me we needed to end this here, in the place where it all began. At the railroad car where my father had carved his initials, where the truth had waited 15 years to be spoken. So we returned to the switching yard one final time, and we weren't alone. Dozens of townspeople came with us, carrying lanterns, their faces set with grim determination. They formed a circle around the car, a living wall of witnesses. We'd been there less than an hour when Mercer arrived. He came with 20 men, all armed, all loyal. They rode in on horses and in wagons, surrounding our circle, guns drawn. At their center, Silas Mercer sat tall in his saddle, his silver hair gleaming in the lantern light. "Miss Caldwell," he called out, "you've become quite the troublemaker." "I've become what you made me," I replied. Someone who refuses to let murder go unpunished. Murder? Such dramatic language. He dismounted gracefully and walked toward the circle. His men followed, but the townspeople didn't break ranks. I came here to offer you one final chance. Give me the journal, leave Gravel Creek tonight, and I'll make sure you have enough money to start a new life somewhere else. I don't want your blood money. Then what do you want? Justice? He laughed. There is no justice, girl. There's only power. And I have all of it. Not any more, Maggie said, holding up the journal. Everyone here has seen what's in this book. They know what you've done. Mercer's smile faltered. He looked at the faces surrounding him, faces of people who'd worked for him, feared him, obeyed him for years. And he saw something that clearly unsettled him. You're all fools, he said. Do you think one book will change anything? I own the judges. I own the law. This territory runs on my money, my rails, my decisions. You killed my father, I said, stepping forward. You killed Elias's brother. You killed dozens of men whose only crime was being honest. And you did it because you're a coward who can't stand the thought of being held accountable. His face darkened. You dare, I dare everything. Because I have nothing left to lose. You took it all already. Mercer's hand went to his gun. His men tensed, ready to fire. The townspeople gripped their tools and makeshift weapons. The air felt electric with violence about to break. Then Elias stepped beside me, and his voice rang out clear and strong. 15 years ago, I watched you murder my brother. You made me watch. You wanted me to carry that fear forever, to let it poison me until I couldn't even remember who I used to be. He stood straighter, and I saw the ghost of the engineer he'd been. Well, I'm done being afraid. James died because he had the courage to stand up to you. The least I can do is finish what he started. Touching, Mercer said coldly. But meaningless, he turned to his men. Burn it, the car, the journal, all of it. And anyone who tries to stop you. His men moved forward, torches already lit. The townspeople braced themselves. I clutched the journal to my chest, preparing for the fight. But then a voice cut through the chaos, authoritative and commanding. Hold your positions. Everyone stand down. A man in a federal marshal's uniform rode into the circle, followed by 6 armed deputies. He dismounted and walked directly to Mercer, his badge gleaming. Silas Mercer, I'm Federal Marshal William Garrett. I'm here to investigate allegations of fraud, weapons, trafficking, and murder. Mercer's face went white. On whose authority? The Territorial Governor's Office received a telegram this afternoon detailing serious criminal allegations. I've been authorized to seize all relevant evidence and place anyone involved under arrest pending investigation. He held out his hand to me. Miss Caldwell, I believe you have a journal I need to see. I handed it to him with shaking hands. Marshal Garrett opened it, read several pages, and his expression grew harder with each line. Mr. Mercer, he said quietly, I'm placing you under arrest. You can't do this. Do you have any idea who I am? What I can do? I know exactly who you are. That's why I brought enough men to ensure you can't bribe or threaten your way out. He nodded to his deputies. Take him! Mercer's men looked at each other uncertainly. They'd been loyal when he held all the power, but now, facing federal authority, that loyalty evaporated like morning mist. One by one, they lowered their weapons. As the deputies put Mercer in chains, he looked directly at me. There was no charm in his eyes now, no calculated smile, just naked hatred. This isn't over, he said. I have friends, resources, You'll hang, Marshal Garrett interrupted, or spend the rest of your life in prison. Either way, your empire ends tonight. They led him away, and the townspeople erupted in cheers and tears. People embraced, sobbed, laughed with relief. Years of fear and suppressed anger poured out all at once. Elias stood beside the railroad car, one hand pressed against its rusted side. I walked to him and took his other hand. We did it, I said. James can rest now, can he? Elias looked at me, his eyes still haunted. I ran when I should have stayed. I let fear win for 15 years, but you came back. You helped me finish it. That's what matters. He nodded slowly, and some of the weight seemed to lift from his shoulders. Not all of it, maybe not even most of it, but enough. The trial took 3 months. Marshal Garrett was thorough, methodical, determined to build a case so ironclad that not even Mercer's money could break it. He brought in investigators from Washington, interviewed hundreds of witnesses, and examined every page of my father's journal. The evidence was overwhelming. Mercer had been running illegal weapons for over 20 years, selling to anyone who could pay. He'd forged property deeds for half the territory, stealing land from families who'd settled it legally. And he'd ordered the deaths of at least 37 men who'd discovered his schemes, 37 families destroyed, 37 widows and orphans who'd been told to accept it and move on. The judge sentenced him to life in prison. He'd die behind bars, his empire dissolved, his property seized and sold to pay restitution to the families he'd destroyed. Sheriff Callahan was arrested too, though his sentence was lighter. 5 years for accepting bribes and obstruction of justice. He didn't fight it. Maybe he was relieved to finally stop pretending. As for the railroad car, it became something unexpected. The territorial government designated it a memorial, a reminder of what happens when power goes unchecked and ordinary people stay silent. They moved it to the center of town, restored it carefully, and opened it as a museum. Inside, visitors could see the crates that once held illegal weapons, now empty. The documents that had been sealed for so long, now displayed behind glass. And at the center, the coffin-shaped box that held my father's journal, preserved for future generations. On the dedication day, 6 months after Mercer's arrest, I stood before a crowd of people and spoke about my father, about James Caldwell, who'd worked the rails and asked inconvenient questions, who'd kept meticulous records because he believed the truth mattered, who died protecting evidence that would eventually free an entire town from tyranny. My father carved his initials in this car, I said, my hand resting on that same spot. He wanted someone to know he'd been here, that he'd seen what was hidden, and he trusted that eventually someone would have the courage to open the lock and bring his truth into the light. I looked out at the faces watching me. Elias stood in the front row, sober now, working as an engineer consultant for the new legitimate railroad company that had moved into the territory. Maggie beside him, her boarding house expanded and thriving now that Mercer's shadow was gone. And scattered throughout the crowd, the families of the ghost crew, the widows and orphans and parents who'd lost their sons to Mercer's greed. They weren't ghosts anymore. They had names, stories, recognition. This car carried cargo that should never have rolled, I continued. But it also carried something more precious. It carried proof that murder and corruption can't stay buried forever. That ordinary people, armed with nothing but truth and courage, can stand against even the most powerful tyrants. I paused, letting my words settle. My father died because he refused to look away, because he believed that someone, someday, would finish what he started. I'm honored that I got to be that someone. But I didn't do it alone. None of us did. This town stood together when it mattered most. You all chose courage over fear. And that choice changed everything. The crowd applauded, but I wasn't done. I turned to the railroad car one last time and placed my hand on my father's initials. "Thank you, Papa," I whispered, "for showing me that the truth is always worth fighting for, no matter how long it takes, no matter how much it costs." Later, as the crowd dispersed and the sun set over Gravel Creek, Elias found me standing alone by the car. "You did good," he said. "James would be proud, so would your brother." "Our fathers," he smiled faintly. "Same person, Nora, we talked about this." "I know. But he was both, wasn't he? Your brother and my father. Both parts of him were brave." "Yeah, they were." Elias looked at the car, at the sunset reflecting off its still rusty panels. "I'm staying, you know, here in Gravel Creek. Figured it was time to stop running." "Good. The town needs people who remember. What about you? What's next?" I thought about that. For so long, my life had been defined by loss and the need for justice. Now that I had it, now that my father's death had meaning and his killers were punished, I wasn't sure who I was supposed to be. But maybe that was okay. Maybe I got to decide. "I'm staying too," I said. "Someone needs to run this memorial. Make sure people remember what happened here. Make sure it never happens again. keeper of the truth," Elias said. "Sounds right for you." We stood together in comfortable silence as darkness fell. The railroad car loomed behind us, no longer a symbol of secrets and death, but of resilience and courage. A coffin transformed into a monument, a relic redeemed by truth. The past never truly disappears. It waits in the rust and shadows, in locked doors and sealed cargo, in the silence of those too afraid to speak. It waits for someone brave enough to open the lock, someone determined enough to bring hidden things into the light. My father opened that lock. I just finished turning the key, and now, finally, after 15 years of waiting, the truth was free. The dead had their voices, the living had their justice, and in that rusted railroad car, in the heart of a town that refused to forget, the ghosts could finally rest. The Caldwell Memorial Railroad car still stands in the center of Gravel Creek. If you visit, you can see James Caldwell's initials carved into the wood, a testament to one man's courage and his daughter's determination to make his death mean something. The locals will tell you that on quiet nights, if you listen carefully, you can hear the wind whistling through the car's wooden panels, sounding almost like voices, like the ghost crew finally given permission to speak, like truth refusing to stay buried, like justice, long delayed but never denied. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.